All right, I think it's going.
Okay. Hi,
All right.
Sarah.
Hi, Julian.
Um, I knowing how to start these recording things is always weird and awkward. So,
Really, really awkward. I know I've hesitated for a long time just making myself do it because I tend to worry about, I don't know, that I'm just gonna say something stupid. And because
it,
a
it
lot of, go ahead.
it changes the dynamic of the conversation a bit because you're all focused on saying something intelligent instead of sort of
Right.
getting in the flow of the conversation. I've noticed that.
And you have to deal with dead space too. It's like if there's dead space, you can't, I don't know, people are gonna tune out really fast. It's not like in a normal conversation where you're sitting around and you can just go grab a cup of coffee and come back and gather your thoughts. It's like you have to be producing something. So that makes
Uh-huh.
me a bit nervous. But I also know that I want to get better at being able to, get my thoughts out there in a more concise way. So I'm like, okay, I just need to make myself do it and get over the awkwardness of it. So here we are.
Trying to fill up those dead spaces
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, One interesting thing about you, I was talking to Luke about his oh, this is a while back. Maybe, yeah. I was talking to Luke about his sort of critiques of modernity and, you know, um, the environmental disasters we've caused, the sort of technological acceleration, the scientific view of the world, and how um, that's sort of abstracted us from reality, I would say.
Mhm.
And one thing I think he said this about you is you and your husband are actually trying some alternative farming techniques.
Yeah.
And that would, I'd be interested to hear more about that. Um, yeah, I really admire people who are trying something different.
Yeah, it's interesting because I did not grow up a farmer at all. I mean, I grew up pretty much a city kid. It was a smaller town in Texas. And my mother grew up in a ranching community. So it's not like I wasn't familiar with that sort of lifestyle to a certain degree, but I had never experienced it. I was always we always spent a lot of time outdoors. Like we went fishing a lot, and I spent a lot of my childhood just playing in the mud. So it was like I had this connection with nature. But that versus large scale agriculture up here in the Midwest is a totally different thing. So it was a bit of a culture shock for me, coming to this environment and getting used to how, I don't know, like the farming methods that are in the Midwest, and I'm not sure how they are up in your area. But I know I mean, I told you there's a Hutterite colony just right down the road from us, and they do very similar farming to the way
Yeah.
we do it. It's very large scale, and um, I think when the immigrants first came to this area, they all had their little section of land. But as technology progressed, as I don't know, time went on, it was like you had to either. I mean, a lot of these farmers went out of business and sold their land to the neighboring farmers. So now it's in this area. It's like we're pretty isolated. I mean, I think we farm about 5,500 acres in this
Whoa.
area, and most people around here have, at least 2 or 3 thousand acres. So it's not it's a lot different than it used to be, for sure. It's like the whole idea of being a rural community where everyone knows their neighbor and that sort of thing. It's not that this doesn't have that feel here. Now
Hmm.
there is some element of that in, if you're really, I mean, like Josh, my husband would have more of it because they go to the same, I don't know, like meetings,
Dealerships and
and
oh yeah.
yeah, so they cross paths a lot. But as far as me being the wife and being on the farm, like I have not connected with people in that way much.
Mm.
And maybe that's, how much of that is my fault, I don't know. I'm not a super extroverted, go out there and meet people kind of person. But that was probably the biggest challenge to moving up to this area, is that I just felt like people really kept to themselves and weren't really interested in getting to know an outsider. Um,
Hmm.
so that's was kind of my introduction to the whole farming realm up here. And it kind of initially was off-putting. I was like, well, this doesn't seem like the way I want to live my life. Like I have to be able to find some community and connect with people. And I want to know my neighbors, but, I think a lot of it too, and my family up here would admit this. They're the Scandinavian German types, so they're more closed off emotionally, and I come from a very emotionally expressive family. So that was also a bit of a shock and a challenge. So yeah, so I was, again, like, the whole farming thing was never something that I really cared to. I don't know, I just didn't want to get involved in it. It was like my interaction with nature had been very intimate, very personal, very interactive, and it always felt like to me that it was all, it felt more industrial
I get
and
it.
more, yeah, and more like like the separation, like you put layers of technology in between yourself and the land, and it just doesn't have the same feel. And yet at the same time, if you ask my husband, he would say that he does have that connection with the land and with the
Mm.
farm and whatnot. Um, because it's a fifth generation farm. Like his ancestors came over from Germany and Norway and all those places and settled this land, literally. So he has that tie, I think, that tie that goes back, and it's the same land that his parents lived on, and his grandparents, his great grandparents. I mean, right here on this homestead. But again, like, me being the way that I was, I struggled to connect with that. Um, as we as we you know went along in our marriage, this opportunity came for us to purchase a farm in Africa, in Mozambique.
Mm.
And I have always been a very adventurous person. My husband actually is as well. And we're like, what are we living this life for? If we could build this nice, put all of our money into a nice house and whatnot, but that, we're more concerned about having experiences. And I think that's a very kind of millennial way of thinking anyway, I
Yeah.
mean, like, our parents, they wanted to be secure, and they wanted to have, and we are in some ways, because we've invested in land and things, but like, we'd rather drive old cars and spend the money traveling, that sort of thing. So that was a way for us to, and well, okay, backing up a bit. So we went over to Mozambique trying to do the same type of farming that we did here. Now, obviously, it's Africa, so it's not going to be the same. And it brought things down to a level that I felt more connected to, because it was like, okay, we're actually kind of getting our hands in the dirt, and the technology is necessarily less because you're there and you have to be able to fix things with your hands. And so that kind of started a process of figuring out, like, how to be sustainable in a country where your resources are limited. The support that you have is not right down the road. And also realizing that the climate just wasn't suited for doing the kind of farming that we do here. And I was, like, excited about that, because I was like, I don't connect to the giant fields of corn and soybeans in the same way that my husband does. And there was part of me that really wanted to be involved in that. I want to be involved in what he's doing. And I will say that I've grown in that area over the years, and I've found ways to connect with it over the years.
Mm.
But again, like, just the way, and I think God made us with different personalities for a reason and different motivations. And I think my husband and I are different for good reasons, and complement each other well. So all of it to say, it's like, I told my husband, I said, I feel more connected to the farm in Mozambique than I do to the farm here, even though we're living on it, because it was like I was coming in as this outsider. There are definitely ways that everyone does things, and it's hard to question the way things are done. It's like, well, that's the way we do them. That's the way we've been doing them. And why would you do it any differently? And I'm one to try and ask questions, and that makes people uncomfortable. So I
Yep.
I haven't done that much. Um, so all of that really has led to us coming to a place where I think I've pushed my husband to kind of figure out, okay, to start to question things and to be curious and to be innovative, not so innovative that it just throws everything off the rails, but I think it's like one little step at a time. And, you know, I have this tension between wanting to be nostalgic and hold to like tradition and things that have come from the past, and also wanting to push ahead. But I think sometimes pushing ahead is actually going back to the past. And so it's like, what are the methods that we've lost from early farming that we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater, that perhaps were things that we're seeing consequences of now with like soil erosion and I don't know. I mean, who knows how it really applies to things like climate change, whatever you want to think about that, you know? And, but then deeper than that, it's like, how is the land and our interaction with it changing and forming us spiritually, and how does it all relate to, you know, our lives as Christians? So I want to bring all of these, I want to bring all of these pieces together and integrate them, because to me, if you can fit it all together, it has more meaning. And like, it makes you see things in ways that you wouldn't be able to see if you didn't put all the connections together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely get what you're saying. I mean, you mentioned like the Hutterite colony near you is all into these modern farming techniques, and that's probably true across the board. Yeah. Probably in many ways we are ahead of the game technologically, because we just have more resources, more people, so we're able to afford the latest and the greatest. And like, you'll have colonies who will do things like they'll just you know, buy the newest combines or whatever, then trade them in the next year just to get the new ones. And yeah. And there's a part of me that, there's a really big part of me that just revolts against that in a major way, where I really feel attracted to something like what Wendell Berry is up to.
Yeah. I just started tapping into that, and I'm like,
And my sort of utopian dream would be just this community life that's really simple and down in the dirt, and not so, like you said, removed from the land with, you know, with these tractors and air conditioned cabs and all the rest. Like I've noticed in myself, for example, I work in manufacturing, I guess, and even that, where you're literally working with your hands, there's just this, you just don't feel the same connection you do as when you're literally working outside, getting your hands dirty, you know, working in the garden, picking peas in the hot sun on your back, people around you, and you're talking to them, and your bare feet are getting dirty, and your pants are way too messy to bring into the house, and your bucket is getting heavy in your hand. These types of things, where there's this connection to reality, I guess.
Yeah.
And you just don't get the same sense when you're when everything gets so big and so abstracted and so far away. So I definitely get the sense from that angle. Another question I would have is, like, could both of us become comfortable with the way things are and sort of find our place within it, right? Sort of get this sense of reality and community, within this more technologized, abstracted, large scale thing?
It's a good question.
Because I see people around me who manage to pull it off because they're involved in it. They find it meaningful. They you know, I mean, and most people in my community, they find their work meaningful. They don't really have a problem with the way we're doing things. So it could be sort of just my critical element that's removing myself from that. Yeah, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I would say that's something I've wrestled with over the past, well, probably 12 years of our marriage. And I would say my husband does find that satisfaction with his work. Like he hasn't gone through a meaning crisis, you know.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
he doesn't have that problem because he feels like he's doing something that is worthwhile and that's productive and that is, you know, beneficial to the community and the world. And not everyone has that. I think it's pretty rare. And he also loves what he does and he really enjoys it. So a lot of times I feel like I've just been the killjoy, like not being the one that's able to just get over myself and integrate. Actually, well, I just to kind of talking about the close to the
Well,
earth.
can I tie something in? I mean,
Yeah.
I was struck by this comment in Paul was talking to Chris, this Chris guy from the Vervaeke project. And he actually said, you know, the more he's been engaged in Vervaeke's project, the more he's come into a sort of meaning crisis, the more the meaning crisis has become
Really
relevant for him. And there's different ways of thinking about that. Like one way of thinking about it would be, you're just not aware that you're in despair, or you're not aware that you're having a meaning crisis. It's there underneath, but because you're not self-reflective, you're not noticing it in a way.
Or because you're so distracted.
Yeah, you're so distracted is one. Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of truth in that. Where, yeah, well, I mean, one way of thinking about it is just this obviously doesn't apply to your husband or to people in my community, but you know, the sort of hedonist person who's just running from one sensual pleasure to the next. There's a despair lurking underneath that.
Right.
But yeah. But I also, there's layers to this. And I often also think of this notion of the kingdom of God is within you. And I think I've said this to you. It's sort of being content and at peace with wherever you're at. And the outside doesn't necessarily have to reflect the inside. It's a tough place to be.
Yep. Yeah, and I think I tend to idealize the foreign. And like, I don't know if you've seen the Peugeot video. I remember which one it is. There's one in particular. Gosh, I don't remember now. But anyway, maybe it's the alien one or something. But anyway, he talks about how we project our idealizations and our passions or sin nature onto. We can do both to the outside, and that can happen like idealizing the past. It can be, or demonizing the past, idealizing the future. This whole progressive mindset of like we're advancing, so we're so is the future is the idealization. But it can also happen in space, like you can idealize the foreigner or the outsider. You can say, oh, those people in such and such country, they know, they do it right, they do everything well. Or you can also demonize, those people in such and such country, they're the worst. And and it's like this projection that doesn't add up to reality. And I think I tended to, like you were saying, think that the thing I need is out there versus inside. And I think that's really what this whole journey has been for me in the past year and a half, and finding Peterson and Peugeot is just really making myself find that thing and find that element of, well, honestly, it's finding Christ within your heart, right? I mean, it's it's the cliche thing we were told as kids. I mean,
the evangelicals were right.
Yeah, yeah, I know, right? And it's always so humbling to me when I totally disregard statements like that, and then they come back, and I'm like, huh, you know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, I think we have lost the meaning of those words. You know, I mean, that phrase didn't mean anything to me until I went through an experience that, and it was, you know, kind of a long-term, over several years experience of realizing that, and made it a real thing, and have made those words have meaning. And I'm sure you understand that. So
yeah, totally. Yeah, there's definitely a connection between the meaning crisis. Yeah, I know we're sort of questioning if such a thing exists. And the sort of over-reflective, or even it's even connected to just overthinking, of course, and over rationalizing, which makes sense because you know, Vervaeke's whole thing is that it's sort of connected to the modern world, and also I think this constant criticism of the status quo, which is something I do myself. I do a lot of myself. Sort of alienates yourself from it, right? So it's just that we've become so self-critical and so critical of our society that it sort of doesn't leave a place for us in it, in a way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely. Well, and just tying that to like the type of, say, of farming that we were talking about, like getting your hands dirty, feeling that connection. I think people really idealize that too, because if you look at, say, I mean, we've done a lot of traveling in third world, and most of the people around the area where our farm is, they are subsistence farmers, and they don't even have pack animals. I mean, they have a hoe. I mean, and this is like, they spend their entire days just trying to get water and grow enough crops to make it through to the next year. And and you can say, oh, well, that's great. But they don't think it's great. You know, they would much rather be sitting in an air-conditioned job in the city. Like, if you gave them that option, they would be there in a second. So it's like we're saying, oh, these things are so wonderful. If only we could all grow our own food and get our hands dirty. Well, maybe, but there's a lot that comes with that. I mean, we've figured out how, when, you know, you start to want to do things more naturally. I mean, like, nature isn't necessarily cooperative. You know, it like it wants to do its own thing. And so I think the balance is like, it's approaching nature with that spirit of finesse. It's like, okay, so how can we integrate, and how can we kind of give and take, and how can we love creation such that it wants to return the favor? And so anyway, all that to say, there's this project we're doing in Mozambique has turned into what's called permaculture or agroforestry, which is, it's using a lot of permanent things like trees that really contribute to the environment. And it's planted, like, the trees are intermixed, like different species of trees are all within, like, together. And then there's crops that are planted in between to basically replicate a forest, a natural ecosystem, but with plants that are productive and edible. So it's a really neat way, I think, to integrate like technology, because we're using technology like drone technology to map out the topography of the land, to figure out like where the water is and where the right places to put the trees are. And also technology connecting us with this, say the guy that's working with us is in Holland, and he's flying back and forth on an airplane to help this project. I mean, like, there's so much of this that is only able to be done in this way because of technology. So I think, it is wrong to demonize technology because we use it, and I don't want to be without it. I if I get sick, I want to, I probably want a modern doctor to do surgery on me.
Mhm.
I don't want to go to the doctor in Quran, Mozambique. No thanks. Like,
Yeah, I definitely have a big anti-technology strain inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've experimented with things like getting rid of my smartphone,
Yeah.
which sort of worked. It sort of didn't. I ended up
Mm-hmm.
getting back to my smartphone.
Yeah. Because of the Discord.
Yeah, the bloody Discord. Where was I going to go with this? Two things I wanted to say. I guess, I mean, of course, this whole thing about sort of idealizing this way of farming is one thing, but there's obviously at the same time the fact that like this, the way modern farming sort of, yeah.
No, I hear you. This is me trying to integrate, Julian. It's a struggle.
But then there are people who will say, like, modern farming isn't that bad on the environment. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what you're reading and what your biases are, I think. I mean, I've seen quality information supporting a lot of different sides of things. To me, it just feels like, I don't know.
You'd sort of emphasize the spiritual aspect of it.
Yes.
That's the easiest one to emphasize, I guess.
It is. But at the same time, I think methods matter. And I think the way we interact with the environment is important. Like, I actually think it's really important.
Yeah, I have my ethical views on it as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so hard because that stuff can get so tied up in, like, the SJW stuff. I feel like it's something that is easily triggers one side or the other,
I'm so frustrated by the lack of nuance in talking about SJW stuff.
Yeah.
Because here's a good example. Industrial farming, not industrial farming. What's the other one? Industrial. When you have sort of pigs in cages, or just this whole sort of treating animals like machines and efficiency and like, I don't need to be an SJW to say it's clearly unethical to treat animals like machines, because animals are animals. And I've developed this, what I think is a good way of putting it, which we should treat animals like animals, right? We don't need, it's that simple. We've stopped treating animals like animals. And the problem is, when you're within a sort of conservative farming community, people get really triggered by, the social justice warriors are trying to challenge the way we farm and trying to take away our profits. And I totally get why they would feel that way, because they're embedded in this way of life, and it just feels like a threat. So they want to go all reactionary, but in that sort of setting, it's impossible to have a nuanced conversation and say, okay, maybe they're onto something. Maybe we should be treating the animals better. Maybe we should be thinking more about sustainable practices. But it's either you're a social justice warrior, or you embrace the whole industrial farming thing.
Yep.
And
I think that's where we are trying to push a path, walk on a path that is trying to mediate between the two sides. I don't know how well we're doing it yet, but just with our personalities, I think it's inevitable that we have to kind of, we have to take that middle road. And I also think, I don't know, there's something about, okay, so I mentioned, you know, the subsistence farmers in Mozambique. It's almost like growing up into an adult, or I would say maybe even relates to like the Owen Barfield's final participation in this way. It's like, okay, the people who had to subsistence farm maybe perhaps don't see the benefits of what they're doing. It's like a child, right? Then you grow up and you say you got a job in the city, you left all that behind you, and you think that it doesn't have much value, and that's, you know, your maybe your adolescent years, and that perhaps is what would it be in like the Barfieldian terms? Anyway, just that path beyond original participation, I guess, would be that segment. But then once you get past that, then it's like you have this higher view of it all, and you can say, oh, I see those things that were really valuable, and now I'm going to choose to go back to that. And it's like, and then it's embedded with even with like the depth of meaning that is possible for it to have.
Yeah. This is like you talking in your first conversation with Paul about how you're sort of this foreigner, and I definitely get that with especially my upbringing in a Hutterite community, where you sort of grow up and you're completely naive about how strange and unique your lifestyle is, and then you get into your teens and you start to realize, you know, there's this whole other world where people have much more freedom, and people have a much more, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there that's not a part of the Hutterite way of life, and you sort of get seduced by that, and you're sort of attracted to this sort of hedonistic sex and money and big cars sort of lifestyle. And then you sort of get past that, and you sort of have this outside perspective, and you sort of start to see the beauty of the whole thing, where it's like the community, the solidarity, the connection with nature, the you know, just the fact that people in the community don't have to worry about pretty much anything. Like everything is provided. That whole aspect, the way the way my Christianity sort of suffuses my whole life. Like there's no church and Sunday type of deal. It's like everything I do is sort of part of this story, and sort of seeing these things. And then at the same time, I have this critical perspective where I'm like, okay, I see problems here.
There's still real people.
The whole system, like I see problems. So there's like, there's this sort of re-embedding with this critical distance. So, I wonder if there will be sort of a new generation of Hutterites who are like, they sort of have this outside perspective, maybe hopefully coming back with some positive views in the whole thing, and then bringing us in a new direction.
Do you talk? I mean, do you have friends, peers that feel the same way that you do?
Yeah, for sure. You'd have to get into Hutterite politics here. It's an interesting.
And I'm curious too. I mean, how does your community see you doing things like this? Like what?
I don't know if they necessarily know about it. I mean, it's sort of something I do in my spare time privately. I talk to some people about it. I find it interesting, a bit strange. I don't know. Yeah,
but obviously it's not, I mean, like you said, they seem to embrace technology. It's not anything like Amish or anything like that. So
no, I think we're a bit too the what's the word for the person who doesn't like technology?
The
This is how
Luddite.
the Luddite in me thinks we're a bit too eager to jump on the technology
Mm.
bandwagon, but
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. My husband was funny. We watched the documentary you sent.
Mm.
And he was like, "Oh yeah, I know all about Hutterites. They're communists." And I was like, I was horrified. I was like,
Oh
"They're
yeah,
not
we're
communists."
communists.
and then I heard you talking to someone I don't know, and you're like, "Basically, we're communists." I was like, "Oh great."
Yeah.
But
that
that
would be
wasn't such
that
a
would be a
negative.
provocative thing to
Yeah.
say to some Hutterites who are more right wing. They're like, no, we're not
Yeah.
communists, but we're basically communists.
Yeah. Well, the difference that I pulled from the documentary was that you're allowed to leave. It's not like you're being forced to stay there. Is that?
Yeah, yeah. How
Yeah.
would you even do that? I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, the communist card is an interesting card to play when you're having political discussions.
Yeah.
You have someone from a Hutterite with a right wing perspective, and then like you'll just put out that, hey, we're actually communist pacifists, so you
Yeah.
should be rethinking your political positions a bit here, buddy.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, I always say we're like the '60s hippies, except without the free sex and free drugs element of it.
See, it's perfect.
Oh yeah. So, here's another rabbit hole which sort of connects to everything.
Mhm.
Did you see the article I posted on the Discord on this guy who's gone without money and sort of adopted this life in the woods, sort of without money. He's just sort of living off the land. He's created his own little log cabin, and he's sort of doing this
I
almost
did.
Weatherberry-like thing.
Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't see it.
But I guess one interesting angle for me is how the social justice movement sort of has this emphasis on purity, and this guy living in the woods without money, trying to leave as little an impact on the world as possible, is sort of the logical outcome of that. Where it's like, okay, our consumerism is having this global impact. We're actually white supremacists because of our history. What other kinds of things could you bring up? You know, our obsession with money is creating all kinds of economic inequalities, and the logical outcome of that is sort of to completely is it sort of has this purity thing going on, where how can I abstain from all of these things in such a way that I am absolved from the guilt as much as possible? And you could, I mean, and it's a tough thing for me to say because I'm very attracted to that type of thing.
Yep.
But yeah, it's interesting how that goes.
Yeah, it is. And I always wonder, if I was actually doing it, would I be able to do it? I feel like it would take. I mean, like, I'd like to think that I would be able to, and I'm also drawn to that type of life, but I don't know. I mean, we were watching this documentary about a little farm in California. It's called, what's it called? The Biggest Little Farm or something like that. Anyway, these people bought this land and they decided that they're going to live off the land, not quite as isolated as in the woods, but, you know, grow all their own food.
Has neighbors apparently. I don't know where
Okay.
he is exactly, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So they go through this whole process of they actually fundraised to start this project because they didn't have the money to buy the property. And they took this kind of scrubland. It was not the best farming land, and they, you know, their idea was to go in and turn it back into good land with, you know, ethical farming practices and whatnot. And all their animals were free range, and, you know, I mean, it was all the things that you would want it to be. And as they go through the process, you just realize like the challenges that come with wanting to do that sort of thing. But at the same time, it's a really cool, I think it's a really neat, balanced documentary, because it shows like the bad side, or not the bad side, but the struggle that comes with wanting to do that sort of thing. But then it also shows how the struggle pushes them to be innovative in very, like they've set these structures around this, so these rules, these walls of how they're going to practice farming. Okay, so it's very limited technology as far as like inputs. Like it's all organic. It is you know, they're trying not to say even kill predators or pests with like chemicals or things like that. So they have this kind of these boundaries of like creativity, I guess. So within that structure, say, okay, so they had these slugs that were infesting their citrus trees, and they probably could have sprayed something and it would have been a pretty easy fix. And it completely ruined their crop. Like they had no crop because of these slugs. And it's like, okay, are we going to stick to these boundaries we put around ourselves? Or are we going to try and push and figure out how to deal with this in the way that we've set this up? So what ended up happening, and the different stories like this happen kind of throughout the whole documentary. They had a bunch of ducks in a pond, and because the ducks had been multiplying and just kind of sitting in this one pond, the pond was turning toxic and it was killing all the fish because of all the duck like feces in this pond. And so it's like they're, you know, so they're trying to do everything natural, and you think if you do it natural, things are just going to flow. Well, it wasn't that way. But again, so they had these ducks, they had these slugs. Because they had this structure placed around them, they came up with the idea of putting the ducks in the citrus trees. The ducks ate all the slugs, and it got the ducks out of the pond where they were polluting the pond and making it toxic. And the ducks ate all the slugs, so they didn't have to feed the ducks. The ducks also fertilized the area with, like, you know, duck poop. So I was just like, I was crying in this documentary, like it's just because I know that there are challenges to living that way, but at the same time, I'm like, don't you want to grow? Like, don't you want to change? Don't you want to learn how to innovate in a beautiful, productive way? And so, I mean, I guess that's kind of my goal, is like, what can I do on a small scale that pushes me? And I think we can even think of like boundaries. Like, I'm on this farm within this technological system the way it is. So those are my boundaries right now. Mm-hmm. So how can I find ways within that system to create that type of expression?
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, they got the ducks to eat the slugs. I just lost my train of thought. I think my brain is made foggy by too much ice cream. So
I understand that.
I didn't know that was a thing, but I think but now I think it is.
Yeah. Well, we could segue and talk. I probably need to go in about, I don't know, for sure by 5. But we could talk a little bit about ritual, like we were.
Oh yeah, I think that ties in.
Funny thing, Julian, you were involved in one of my rituals.
Oh, I was.
Don't take that clip out of context. But well, I'll just kind of tell you a little bit about the story. Some of it Some of it you probably heard in my conversation with Paul, which was not aired for those of you who are wondering if you're listening and haven't seen it, it's because it's not out there. If you want to see it, I'll send it to you. But anyway, so I was listening to, and one of the things I'll explain in a minute, I was listening to Paul as I was walking around my yard with my bare feet. And one of the first, I think you were probably one of the very first conversations that he had, like
apparently.
Yeah.
I just
and so,
went back to watch, went back and looked at his stream a while back, and it was like, I'm actually one of the first 10, and that sounds a bit out of nature, but there I am, one of the first 10. So
yeah. Well, anyway, so I have a very vivid memory of listening to that first conversation, because I was participating in what I was participating in. It's like embodied in me. If I go on this one stretch of road up here, like that conversation comes back to me. It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've noticed things like that too, where, well, I mean, I remember cutting grass in throughout the colony, and there's like, when I hear certain songs, it suddenly transports me to a certain place in the community. In my head, I'm suddenly in the West End somewhere.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
What is that, right? Because it's like those memories you couldn't just access them unless they're triggered by whatever it is.
Have you heard about the whole idea of the mind palace? It sort of harnesses exactly this, where you associate things you want to memorize with different locations in your house. And it sounds so weird until you connect it to experiences like this. And I can see how it would work, where you sort of go to this spot physically, and then you'll suddenly remember what you were trying to hold fast to that spot. It's very cool.
Well, that's why in like education, especially like child education, they'll tell you to have kids play with something with their hands, or jump up and down while they're reciting their multiplication tables or whatever, because that embodied action helps solidify it in your memory, helps you recall it. And you can even, if you're having trouble recalling, you can go back to whatever you were doing with your hands or with your body, and those memories, the information will come back to you. So it's definitely it's being studied more and more, I think. But my little ritual story, I'll just tell this one. I'm not going to summarize my whole background, but I was raised very, just evangelical, a lot of emphasis on believing the right things. And I think, it's that whole growing up thing. You start to just question everything. And I went through a phase for sure where I just wanted to abandon it all, because you see like you're saying, you see the inconsistencies, you see the things that don't work. And, but then you start to mature and whatnot. But one thing that I really have noticed that, was lacking in at least the quote institutions of evangelicalism is an emphasis on what we do with our bodies, and how that does affect our knowledge of God in general. And so that's why I think that's one aspect of why Peterson and his clean your room idea has been so powerful, because it's making people do something with their body that then affects how they know things. I don't know. It's tricky to try and explain with words. It's like, well, okay, I'll give this example. I was having trouble, like I was saying, integrating here, feeling like an outsider, feeling like a foreigner. And it came to a point where I was really feeling disconnected from my husband's family, and especially his father. Like we've never had a close relationship. I think that just the way we think is just so different that it was hard for us to come up with anything in common. Well, within about 6 months, his mother and father passed away, and my mother-in-law's mother all passed away within about 6 months. And I had distanced myself from my father-in-law such that, like, I look back on it and I'm like, how was I this removed? And I mean, I'm a very emotional person. So like for me, I mean, like it was even hard for me to say something to him when his mother and father passed away. Like, I don't know. It's hard to understand looking back why you behave the way you behave sometimes. But anyway, it came to the point where my husband came to me and was just like, I don't know, I was just feeling really bitter and ungrateful, I guess. And he came to me and was like, Sarah, what is going on? Like, Dad, talking about my father, and like, he doesn't even feel like you see him when he comes in the room. And like, I mean, like, he would walk in the house and I would almost avoid having to interact because it was awkward, because I felt like I had to be fake or come up with some conversation. And he's not a very emotional person. He doesn't talk about feelings. He doesn't talk about his past. And it's just challenging for me when someone is not open. And that's how I relate. But him saying that really struck me, and it hit me in, the dark place that I didn't want to admit was there. And it was very good. And that was kind of during this time when I'm exploring, trying to figure out how to connect with this farm, because we moved into my in-laws' house. It was her house. Like, we moved in and there were her decorations on the wall, her wallpaper in the kitchen. And it's just like, this is not mine, But I made it just an intentional effort to, and this kind of came through watching Peterson as well. It's like, okay, what are some tiny, small steps that I can do to move in this direction that I want, and that I want, but I'm not feeling it. Like, I don't feel this. And I just kind of remembered how I would connect with things in my past. And I was like, okay, well, it's spending time with them. How do I connect with my home in Texas? Like, I spent a lot of time running around outside with my bare feet and getting my feet dirty and walking in the grass. So I was like, okay, like, there were all these people that came before me that have lived in this area, and they all had stories, and they're all real people with struggles. And also my father-in-law's parents were just really dysfunctional. Like, there was a lot of verbal abuse, if not physical abuse. Just so some real tragic things occurred right here in this location. And so my idea was, and it wasn't my idea, but coming from a lot of different things I'd been thinking about and listening to, just like, okay, I'm gonna ritualistically take my shoes off and just start walking in the yard. And so I started walking kind of this path that would go like behind the house, back around the trees, through the raspberry bush, and I followed this same path, like, over and over again. And I even wore like a track like, you could see where it started to wear a path in the grass, like where I had been walking. And there were just so many things that happened during my participation in that, because I was doing it. It wasn't just like this dead ritual that I was doing for no reason. Like, the purpose that I brought to it was, I want to connect to this farm, right? And it was almost like an ask and you shall receive type situation, because I was just blown away, like, over and over again, with these amazing revelations and realizations of my role in this story, and how my father-in-law had been, in a way, kind of a Christ figure in his family, because he he had been the one who put an end to that abusive behavior. And through his parents dying, there came a point where he really opened up about his mother and his situation here, and how he would be the protector to his young kids when his father was going off the rails. He would take them and carry them in the next room, because he was the oldest, and just shelter them until the fighting was over. And so all of those things, him opening up, me having, gone through this kind of ritualistic walking in the backyard, it was like, it just, all of a sudden it just hit me, and I had this openness towards him. And it was like a veil dropped, and I saw him as this real person that I could connect to. And I won't say that our relationship is perfect at this point, but it's tremendously changed since that moment. And also slowly, but significantly, my attitude towards this farm has grown and developed and changed. And I had this moment where I was walking, one of the many moments, but this was probably the most significant one, where I was just walking back there, and I would just kind of I would either maybe listen to something, maybe just let my mind wander. But at one point, like I was hit with this, I mean, it really was the words that I feel like from God that just said, I had this thought that being this outsider, this foreigner, was this negative thing, but I was hit with the words, just, you are the outsider. And then it was almost like this floodgate opened up of the realization of how God has used biblically and throughout history, people coming in from the outside that are an element of restoration for that land or that community or whatever. And so it's just given me this perspective on my life and what my role is here in a positive way. It's like the same exact circumstances, the same, the same past, everything. It's not like you can change what has come before you, but it's like moving into the future. I can see this path that has me as a part of a bigger story that is redemption, actually. And an interesting thing is, this is one of those those things you're like, wow, does that just happen? I don't know. So my father-in-law, who is the heir of this farm, the son, the one to inherit, in the bloodline, his name actually means foreigner. And my name means like princess or heir to the throne. And it's like, I was like, what?
I love it.
I know. It's just stuff like that has come again through this seemingly simple ritualistic obedience of like, just take your shoes off and walk in the frickin' grass, and do it over and over again, even when it seems pointless. And again, that, we could go down a whole a whole rabbit trail of things that have kind of come from that, but just me trying to realize, okay, if that's given me this revelation of God and myself and this whole big picture, like what else is there? I mean, it's happened again in little, smaller circumstances, but yeah, that moment where I was hit with those words is like, I fell on my knees. I've never been overwhelmed with like in worship and gratitude to the point that I couldn't even stand. And I just, I cried, and I felt God's presence in that spot right out there in the backyard. I mean, it's holy, it's sacred ground now. And that whole path, I mean, even my kids would come out, I'd be walking back there and they'd follow. And I'm like, following in your path, literally. And I can tell them about this story, it's just like, this is all such simple, literal stuff that we just disregard,
That's beautiful.
So it's like, what else is there?
Yeah, I've experienced something similar, where I guess these experiences where I've when you sometimes you sort of know what the right thing is to do, but you just put off doing it for forever. Maybe
what? I never do that.
But what I've experienced recently is just to to just follow that voice that's telling me to do what I know I'm supposed to do. And you know, if it's something like one of the most beautiful experiences I've had recently is where I had this issue with one of the people in the community. And um, what was the issue? Like I was feeling bitter towards him for something he did, and I was talking about him behind his back, and um, just this bitterness. And then I decided I'm just going to go have a conversation with this guy, tell him how I feel, tell him I've been bitter against you, and just apologize from my side. And then I just felt like the whole thing was stupid. Like, why should I bother doing this? It's not like um, I did something wrong to. It's not like I did something explicit. It's not like yeah, it just didn't seem like that big of a deal. But I just felt like this is something I need to do. And then when I actually decided to go apologize, it was just this beautiful moment of reconciliation. It's just one of the most powerful things I've experienced recently, where I think you mentioned this in your conversation with Paul. It's sort of this leap of faith, this going out, this venturing into the unknown, and that's how you find your place in the story, I think, is when you yeah, it's when you follow the voice of God, I guess. So yeah, I totally get it.
Yep.
But the ice cream is making me pretty inarticulate. So
well, I should probably get going and check on my children. But I think we should maybe have another conversation where we dig into this a little more. Like,
oh yeah,
we've talked about, like Drew Johnson and Esther Meek, and I've listened to a lot of their stuff and read a lot of their articles and listened to podcasts, and it just resonates so deeply with me. And
it connects to a lot of different angles. I've been coming at this. I mean, James A.K. Smith with his liturgies comes to mind.
Yep.
Stanley Hauerwas, someone I've been influenced by, who speaks of the church as a polis, and how you're shaped by the practices of the church to live into the story of the church.
Yep.
Just these types of things. So I know exactly where Esther and Drew Johnson are coming from. So yeah.
And I'm in a position as well where I have been, bitten by the Orthodox bug, like a lot of us have been, while digging into that and just discovering the richness of it. And at the same time, not in a position where I feel like that's where I'm supposed to be right now necessarily. So like, how do you move forward then? And I think, like you said in one of your conversations, like, is that to leave my tradition that I'm in and go to that? Is that the Protestant thing, to do?
Yeah, it is.
Is that the individualistic thing to do? And while for someone like you, I think I may have mentioned this in one message at one point, but it's like for someone like you and for Paul, like, you have a tradition that at least goes back a few generations. Like for me, my growing up years were just a hodgepodge of different evangelical, segments that were very different from each other in a lot of ways. The church we're in now, I've never felt entirely connected to, or like it was a home church, but there is the fact that we've been there for 12 years, and my husband and I both have leadership positions there. So it's like,
bunch of closet Orthodox is running the Protestant church.
Right, exactly. But I'm like, because we do have that position, what can, instead of just, trying to blow the whole thing up, how can I play a role in using the things that I've gained from learning about other Christian traditions, which I had no awareness of really before the last couple of years, honestly. How can I use those things and integrate them in a way that is beneficial? And not just because, like, I don't want to do it just because it seems new and different. And I've had to question my own motives a lot through the whole process. It's like, why do I want to do these things? Why do I want everyone to study ritual and figure out why liturgy is so valuable? It's like, I don't know. It can just be to seem like you have the answers, or the fresh new idea out there. But deep inside, I think I just really want to know God, and I want to give people a chance to participate in that as well. And I want to do it together in community. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, but I often find myself sort of I'll say one thing, and then when someone says the same thing, I'll sort of say the opposite. So here I go with the counter argument.
Oh, great.
I think we often tend to emphasize the lowest common denominator when it comes to Protestantism. And maybe one way of sort of dealing with the Orthodox blog would be sort of to dive into the deeper aspects of the Protestant tradition. Maybe reading people like Luther and Calvin, or maybe the people at Mere Orthodoxy, or do you follow Mere Orthodoxy at all? Like
yes, and Alistair Roberts, I really appreciate him.
There's some
how much of his stuff.
I love their podcast. The Mere Fidelity, they have some. I love the podcast more and more. The takes they have and everything it's always quite good.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's so true, because in order to say, it's not like I want to turn our church into an Orthodox church, but it's like I want to recognize the patterns of transformation that are being lost, or that were thrown out just because they were just ritual, or dead liturgy, which a lot of people that came into evangelicalism left, like the Catholic and Lutheran Church, because it was dead ritual that they didn't know what or why they were doing it, and that's just as destructive, I think.
And you probably also feel really alienated from, maybe, I don't know what it's like in your church, but you probably feel alienated because not a lot of people sort of have the same appreciation for liturgy, or sort of recognize maybe problems with sola scriptura, or these types of things.
Right.
And another problem is often also the language that gets used. Just one often feels alienated from a certain way of speaking within Christian tribes. And I often find myself just discounting everything a person has to say because of the language tribe game that's going on.
Yep.
So.
And that's why I really appreciated like Drew Johnson and Esther Meek, because they're not, they are coming at it from a Protestant perspective, and yet they're speaking these same truths that I feel like I've taken from what I've seen in Catholicism or Orthodoxy or whatever. So it's like, if I bring a Catholic notion to the people at my church, they're automatically gonna reject it. Not all of them, but there are some people who are going to. So it's almost like I have to be creative and approach these, the patterns, the truths that I'm seeing that I have been missing in my life, that have actually been impactful for me. But I have to figure out a way to bring them in through another door. And that, I think, actually adds to the richness of it, because it's not like these truths, I don't know. I go back and forth. Like, are they just held within one tradition? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think so.
And if you did it, and if you did dive into Catholicism or whatever, could you actually sign into what's going on in that tradition either?
Yeah.
I mean, Catholicism in particular. Like, I don't know if I can ever be comfortable with the idea of the Pope or, um, uh, yeah, the whole Catholic sex scandal is a big thing too.
Yep.
I think there should be some kind of there should actually be some moral questioning going on for someone wanting to join the Catholic Church when you know there's that level of abuse going on. I think there should be sort of, okay, what am I actually signing up to? What is the what's going on spiritually in this church? Which, yeah, that's one question I would have to ask, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely complicated.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I really
You've got the farmer yup thing down though.
Yep.
How's the weather down in Texas?
Uh-huh.
Pretty good. Yep.
Got some rain last week. How many
Yep.
inches did you get?
It's actually raining right now, and
Yeah.
we're in the middle of harvesting, so it's not too good.
Mm. Well, sorry about that.
Yep. Is that a thing you picked up from the farmer crowd, or have you always had the yup thing going?
I feel like that's kind of a Texas thing too.
Oh, okay.
My parents say that a lot. I catch myself saying my vowels differently sometimes because of the accent up here. But yeah, we'd say yep.
How are the vowels? I mean, what do you mean?
Oh, they just change their vowels. Like it's a lot of like oh sounds and ya sounds and like they'll.
This is the German thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Fargo. That sort of Minnesota accent.
Soda. Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds like. Yeah, one interesting thing with the sort of the subculture with the Hutterites is there's different colonies that have different accents.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone will be making fun of. There's this colony right next to us called Dana that has this really slow way of talking, and then people will go like, "Oh, so wait, how did this go?" Like they'll just say, "Oh, the Dana people have come." Like, yeah, and then there's this other colony that has this sort of really English way of talking. It'll be like, so we come from Crystal Spring, and the weather's here kind of nice, and we're gonna go down to the lake, and yeah, we kind of talk in this English way that makes all of the Hutterites laugh at us, but we don't care because we're cool. Yeah. Yeah, it's hilarious.
Great.
Okay.
All right. Well, good
Yeah.
chat, and we will pick it back up.
Let's do it. Okay.
I have a lot that I think we can discuss. So, yeah, you have a great day, and it's good to finally see you in person, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll not eat as much ice cream next time.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, all right. Well,
Later.
we'll talk to you later. Bye.